Good evening, listeners. Tonight at Ramsey House at the Do Something seminar, there was a discussion about energy in New Zealand. Mark Walkington, who is a senior analyst in the Energy Modelling Group of the Ministry of Economic Development. Mark presented some of his group recent modelling work from New Zealand's energy outlook. Tonight you presented alternative scenarios. Firstly, the reference scenario, or the business as usual scenario, which shows that demand for energy consumption increases steadily. What does that mean for New Zealand? What are the repercussions if we continue to consume energy the way that we are?
Well, as presented on the graphs, the reference scenario has the appearance of continuing on our merry way. It assumes that energy supply is reasonably assured at prices fairly consistent with what we've experienced in the past. Key price driver is the oil price, which we assume from the World Energy Outlook produced by the International Energy Agency, and that sees oil prices rising to $120 a barrel, I think, by 2025. So while that sees us facing higher fuel prices, it's not, I might say, not anything too dramatic. In fact, we have seen higher prices than that already in 2008. One issue for New Zealand is supply of gas. That's reasonably assured for another 10 years, but after that we may be slightly shorter of supply than what we have had. So that will probably see a rising of the price of gas and a sort of limited demand by some of the larger industrial users and electricity generation. That would leave industry looking for other sources of fuel. They may go to coal, or they might use electricity or perhaps biomass. We do have an emissions trading scheme in place, and we assume that continues, so that also sends a signal to some degree against the use of fossil fuels. One of the issues I raised actually is that transport energy continues on its upward path. Slightly slower rates. We have given up buying bigger and bigger vehicles, and there is sort of a trend at least to more efficient vehicles. Saying that, population grows and our GDP grows, so one thing we do is always drive more, and that demand for oil, assuming business as usual, so we're just assuming a continuation of current technology, so internal combustion vehicles, demand for petroleum products going up, that inevitably leads to more greenhouse emissions from transport, so it doesn't really help us dropping the level of greenhouse emissions.
What can New Zealanders do to kind of reduce the amount of energy that we use? Is there anything that we can realistically do to change the statistics? Or all energy costs money, so obviously there's a reason to reduce energy for personal budgets. So a fellow speaker talked a lot about what an individual household could do. A lot of my talks at a kind of a national macro level. So I'm not really the best placed person to speak on that. There's lots of good suggestions. I do focus on transport energy myself in my group's work. So that is one area, clearly, given a financial resource, people can do something. There's a lot of information now. There's a vehicle labelling scheme at time of purchase. So if people get on the internet and read up, they can determine which are the more efficient cars, which suit their needs. So that's probably one area, clearly, and even in our base case, the oil price rises, petrol prices rise, so that's going to send a signal to have a more efficient vehicle, or maybe consider reducing your demand for travel using public transport. Considering that public transport's kind of iffy, especially in Wellington, do you think that's a realistic option?
No, it does certainly ebb and flow. When the fuel prices went up 2 years ago, there was quite an increased demand in public transport, but then, as you mentioned, there's sort of that breaking stress point for train services. So, and certainly in lots of parts of New Zealand, apart from, well, even in Auckland, there's very limited public transport perhaps, and in many places there's not much, so it really is private transport for a lot of New Zealanders. So if you're fortunate you can afford an efficient car, that's an option. Otherwise you've just got to take your chances.
So what is the time frame for this? When do you think people need to start switching, or is the time now, or is it in the future?
Well, certainly for greenhouse gas concerns, the earlier the better. So, and you know, it's up to individuals really to decide how they view that issue and do what they can. So the emissions trading scheme is some signal from government to individuals. Luckily, I mean, in New Zealand we have the benefits of a highly renewable electricity system, so greenhouse emissions from that source are quite low on an international scale. And looking forward, our reference case sees a lot more renewable electricity, so that's certainly something for people to be reasonably proud of as New Zealanders.
Good. Nice to end on a positive.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say, Mark, that you know the section of MED that you're in is New Zealand's brains trust on these types of documents, the energy outlook?
That's I'll take that as a great compliment. And then certainly I think for energy modelling, the group that I'm in has got a long history, so there's a lot of sort of legacy intellect that's been reported, and now with the internet it's all been recorded there. And some of the models also have been built up over a number of years. The electricity modelling is probably the more complex part of it, and our group has worked with the Electricity Commission in that area
I know
successfully.
This isn't quite your job brief, but really interested that, you know, one of the reports you talked about, and perhaps one of the questions from the audience too that put you, you know, challenged where your modelling comes from, was called Changing Gear. I mean, do you see that people are starting to read these reports to get the message?
Yeah, I was just discussing with a member of the audience that in 2008, when the oil price went very high and fuel prices in New Zealand, there was a great deal of interest, and then as the price drops, people sort of ease back on that a lot of people ease back as that being a major concern. But I think we are going to, from what our scenario says, we are going to see consistently
you could call
higher
that complacency,
prices.
Couldn't you? You know, I mean, that's public complacency. What I'm wondering about is whether or not MED is pushing, you know, the information you've got here so people are aware of the scenarios.
Yeah, well, my group takes on the role of information provision,
Yep.
and we actually have this little motto that our role is to inform the energy debate. And as you saw tonight, there is always a debate going on in energy. So that is the role that we see as our group. So
raise the temperature of that debate is something that we all need to do, do you think?
That can only be useful, I think, for a public interest.
Yep, cool, thank you.